Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the Prophecy of Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament and the last book of our journey through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. All right, we're in chapter 2. I said we were going to do a little a slow walk through chapter 2 because of some issues that Malachi is bringing up that I want to address, and we don't get a chance to talk about them often. And one of them would be marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Now, in the last session, there's a couple of sessions we talked about in mixed marriages, only because this is the same time frame. Remember, Ezra, Nehemiah, also Esther. So the last three books of what's called the historical section. And then you have so Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Esther, and then Haggai, uh, Zechariah, and then Malachi. These are post-exile books, the times after after the 7-year exile was over, the remnant came back. Not all of the seed, the descendants went back to Israel. For example, Esther didn't. Malachi, I want to say, it's questionable about Malachi. And the only reason I say that is because I think in Nehemiah you see a list of leaders and his name come up, but we don't know if it's the same Malachi. But Esther lived her life, I think, out in Persia. But when the remnant came back, and the remnant was always represents a few, so not all. And even to this day, but especially during biblical times, post-exile, so during the time of Jesus, and even when you see Peter and James refer to the dispersed, right? The dispersed, it is referring to the children of Israel that spread out during that time, the Roman Empire, but throughout the world, and ultimately the kingdoms of the world, but the world. So the remnant that came back, and out of, let's say, the millions, maybe at the time some 50,000-60,000 came back, and they soon fell into, again, evil practices, and that is why Malachi is rebuking them. So one of the things Malachi is saying is you're not keeping the covenant. You're not keeping the covenant. You're not keeping the covenant of God. Now you also see the same sentiment with Ezra and Nehemiah. And then we looked at Ezra. Remember, and he said you're marrying foreign women, and that's sin. And the purpose of that rebuke was not because Israel as a race, okay? Israel as a race. Now, the concept of race, it's not kind of, to me at least, it's not worth arguing over whether you want to use the term. A lot of these terms are academic. In other words, you get into an academic study, and then terms are developed. Okay, terms are developed. So race is one of them. If you want to say ethnicity, okay, fine, right? Nationality is probably more accurate. So that, but when you look at race, so then within race, what is called, and again, these are more relatively modern terms within the last few centuries. And some of them were developed from a racist perspective. But if you want to say the different races or different ethnicities, without a doubt, there are different kinds of people on the planet. Asians, you can say Caucasians, Africans or Negroes. What's the other one I'm looking at? I'm missing one. I'm missing several, right? Asians, and so all the different groups of Asians. Of course, within the groups, each group, there are a variety. Okay, God rolls that way. He likes variety. But within the human race, there is no particular race better than the other, superior than the other. And not only that, but every race is from one blood. That's why a black man can marry an Asian man, and there's not going to be any kind of, for example, a man can't mate with a hog. I don't think it's scientifically possible for a person to mate with a hog and then produce a hog-like humanoid, right? You can't, or a horse, or a goat, or whatever. But any person on the planet can mix with any other person on the planet and produce a seed. Why? Every human is compatible. And from a racist standpoint, there are people that try to fight against that. And again, that's from the racist standpoint. From Israel's standpoint, when God created the nation of Israel, he created a nation that would be holy or separated unto himself. That's why he said, don't mix with other people. The other reason is because those other people are incredibly wicked. Thus, if you mix with them, you're going to contaminate the holy seed. You're going to become wicked. You're going to start acting like them. And Israel did that. And that's what happened every single time. So, but that's why. So let's move on. In verse 13, well, let me go back to verse 11. It says, Judas acted treacherously, and a detestable thing has been done in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the Lord's sanctuary, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. And then he says, to the man who does this, may the Lord cut off his descendants from the tents of Jacob, even if they present an offering to the Lord of hosts. And this is another thing you do. You cover the Lord's altar with tears and weeping and groanings, because he no longer respects your offerings and or receive them gladly from your hand. Now I want to get into why he's going to say, why is this? But I'm going to save this probably for the next thing, next study. If I get time, I may get into it here, but I want to go back and this is why, and this, as I told you, this is one of the things we're going to really get into. Verse 14 says, yet you ask for what reason? Because he says, the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth. Now, let me come back to that. I'll come back to that. What I want to deal with here is, notice what he says about in verse 13. And this is another thing that you do. You cover the Lord's offering with tears, with weeping and groanings, because he no longer respects your offerings or receives them gladly from your hands. Now, the purpose of this too is, when he says you guys are weeping, now, up on the surface, it seems like they may be so contrite, though. But the point is that, in a sense, they're not. Now, he says, and oftentimes, when you think about how we should present whatever it is that we're presenting to the Lord, here is always, let me just give you a clue, right? Shouldn't we always have in mind, what is the Lord going to be pleased with? And so many times we say, God, I'm going to give you this. And then we're shocked when God doesn't respect it. Now, in Israel's case, how would they have known that God doesn't respect their offerings? Well, in some of the Leviticus offerings and stuff, sometimes it was received with fire. The Lord would, there would be some kind of fire and stuff, and in that way, okay. Now, but again, I want to deal with the mindset of when he says he no longer respects your offering. Now, some people get angry with God. Let me go back to Cain and Abel. Cain, one of the things about Cain, and when you read these Bible stories, especially, I don't know why people just don't read Bible stories from a position of truth. Okay, they don't. We get these kind of stupid Bible stories, especially children Bible stories. And I remember seeing this, hearing this kids program about Cain and Abel, and it was the audio, so you didn't see the video. It was like, Cain came up, hey, you know, Abel, come out here, and then like, what do you want? Come out here, and all of a sudden, like you hear this, take this, take that, Well, actually, the Cain and Abel story was much more treacherous. What led up to it was that, in fact, if you think about how the Bible reported it, there was a tremendous amount of bloodshed. In other words, he just didn't hit him on the head with a rock unless he really smashed his rock. But anyway, when he smashed his head with a rock completely, but it was brutal. But the reason why he did that was because he said God had no respect for Cain's offering, but he had respect to Abel. But Cain got mad over that. But that kind of showed Cain's heart, because if you offer something to God and he doesn't have respect for it, why would you get angry? Why wouldn't you humble yourself and say, well, Lord, what would you accept so I can be pleasing? Cain showed his disrespect by not submitting to God. And thus, that's why it led to him murdering his brother, his true heart. Now, another person, Samuel, the first king. No, Saul, the first king. God says, you know what? I'm not going to have mercy on Saul. And every time you would see that Samuel would do things of his own. Like the first mess up was he offered an offering. He offered it. Didn't even wait for God. Samuel said, look, wait for me. I'll make the offering. Saul didn't wait. And he offered it. And then God said, you know what? I'm rejecting Saul. The second time, and here's the point, if you were going to try to make amends with God, this would have been the time. He ended up, God told him, I want you to go and slaughter the Amalekites. He did not slaughter them, but he saved his best sheep. So Samuel came and go, man, what are you doing? He go, what? God told you to slay everything, animals and everything else, but I saved the best for the offerings of God. He says, and this is why you get this phrase, does God delight in burnt offering rather than obedience? I know, just a paraphrase there. But even after then the final rejection, he said, well, you know what, tell you what, walk out and kind of just show everybody, walk out with me, and everybody would think everything is cool. Even in that, he doesn't show a contrite heart. Its final act of defiance was to kill himself. Same thing with Judas, by the way. You stop and think about, why did Judas hang himself? He betrayed the Lord. By the way, Peter did, but why did Judas hang himself instead of saying, Lord, forgive me? He'd been around Jesus enough, but why didn't he say, Lord, forgive me? See? And oftentimes we forget, okay, what does God require? For example, in the book of Matthew, which, a few lessons down, we're going to be there, that Jesus said, if you have an ought against your brother, right? If you have an ought against your brother, instead of offering, because instead of making an offering, now why? Because God is not going to be pleased with your offering if you're fighting with your brother. Now, we see even this here when he says, verse 10 again, why then do we act treacherously against one another, profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judas has acted treacherously, and a detestable thing has been done in Israel, a treacherous thing in Israel, right? So, okay, let me go back. All right, I lost my place. All right, here we go. So the idea here is you want to excuse me, you want to present an offering. Jesus said, put your offering down and then go make it right with your brother. Then make your offering. I'm pleased with that. How many times when we think I'm going to make an offering to God and I'm got strife, I got beef with my brother, whatever the beef is. So let's put it like this, like your praise and worship. Your praise and worship. The fake worship. You know, every church has one. You got to have it in the church service, right? They call it worship. You come in, you sing five or six fast songs and maybe 5 or 6 slow songs. That's the worship service. The priming, the pump. Now people say, well, that's worship. I'm worshiping God. Are you? Well, how about this? Let's ask this question. Is God accepting what you're offering? The song. Notice the tears. I love you, Lord. But is God saying, yeah, but you hate your brother? He's telling you, doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. God would much rather you say, you know what? Let me go out and make sure that I'm right, that I'm going to make peace, excuse me, with my brother. Then I can come do these awesome worship songs, right? I can do these awesome worship songs with my brother. So we oftentimes think religiously when it comes to God. We think religiously. I can do all this kind of pretend stuff. The Pharisees were the best at that. Believe it or not, the Pharisees, they thought they could offer something, and with their evil, wicked heart. Here's a good example of this. They coveted with Judas. They coveted with Judas to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And you remember Judas? So the transaction was complete. Judas delivered, but he had an attack of conscience. He goes to the Pharisees and he says, we have betrayed innocent blood. Now the Pharisees, right? The holy people, the pious ones, that's your problem. Judas throws the pieces of silver and goes hangs himself. Now the Pharisees in their piety says, well, what are we going to do with these 30 pieces of silver? The law says we can't put it back into the treasury. That would be breaking the law. The blood money. So let's go buy a potter's field. Here's what I want to point out. Beside the fact that the Pharisees should have known that they were fulfilling prophecy, that they actually had the corrupt minds to think that God was going to give them an attaboy. Well, at least you didn't break the law there. But what about framing an innocent man? Framing an innocent man, causing his death, let alone the Son of God. The religious corrupt mind, and this is what Malachi is now refuting. Your corrupt mind, that you actually think God is moved by your tears, He's not respecting your offering. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.